In this video we'll discuss a new property of a list control that is based on a SQL query, and that is the new server-side after list query event. So you can see here, if we go into this list, it's a simple list that's based on a SQL table, and we specified that the server-side after query event is an XBasic function called after query SQL. So you can see here that if we open up the prototype for this function here, we can see that it tells us that the function gets passed in certain parameters inside the E object, and that in the function you can set e.javascript, which is any JavaScript that you want to return. So let's go take a look at what we actually did for this function called after query SQL. So we'll go here and go to our XBasic functions, and we can see here in our after query SQL the JavaScript that we're going to be returning is some JavaScript to set the inner HTML of an element called message with the current time on the server. So in this particular case, this example is meaningless and nonsensical, but it does serve to illustrate the point. We'll demonstrate a much more meaningful example next after we understand the basic concept here. So we go back to our controls, and we can see that we've got a static text control over here with a div with an ID called message. So we're going to be writing the message that's computed on the server when the list is rendered into this div over here. So we'll go ahead now, and when we run it, we can see that there's the time on the server in seconds, and then if we hit the refresh button, you can see this is updating because the event is firing. So when we go and get more records, the event fires and the data updates. So in this video we've simply shown how this event which is fired after the query for the list is computed can be used to return some data. But now let's go to a much more meaningful example. So we'll go now to let's go to this example over here, and you can see in this example we have a list control that is displaying data from the Northwinds database, and the query that is being used over here is showing data from the orders table joined with the customer table. And in this label at the bottom, we're displaying the total of all the records in the query, but the list itself is paginated, so the list is only returning the first 20 rows. So even though the list is returning 20 rows, this total over here is not the total of the rows that are currently displayed in the list, but it's the total for all the records in the current query. So if I go, for example, here to say this drop down and change to Canada, there are now 30 rows in my query. So you can see that the list though is displaying the first 20 of those queries, and then the total here was updated. So we're using now this new event to dynamically compute the grand total of this subtotal column for all the records in the query. So now that we have seen how this component works, let's go back now and pull it apart and see how this was actually done. So first of all, you can see that we have a drop down here which is just simply displaying the list of countries in the customer table. Then we've got some static text here which is just displaying a label, and the label has record count in it. So this is telling us how many records are currently in the query, and that was done by going to define controls and picking out from here the predefined list record count property. And then at the bottom here we have another text box that has an ID of order total. So this ID is what we're going to be updating in our server-side event. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our video describing how we get the order total for all the records in the query, not simply the records that are currently displayed in the list. So let's go take a look now at our list definition here, and we can see that this list is paginated to fetch 20 records at a time, and that our server-side event that we're calling is called get total. So let's go now take a look at this get total xbasic function. So here we have the xbasic function, and what we can see in this function is that we're looking to see if the number of records in the query is greater than 0. So you can see that records in query is one of the properties passed in the E object. So if the number of records in the query is 0, then we're going to just set total to 0, and then we're going to go here and update the inner HTML of the div, which is where we'd like to put our total, and we're going to just set it to the value total, but formatted with a $sign. So we're using the xbasic string function to format the result. So obviously that's the easy case. The more complex case is when there are records in the query. So you can see here that what we're doing in the code over here is we're getting the connection string. So the connection string is one of the properties that was defined in the list. So e.list properties are all the properties of the list control. So e.listproperties.sql.connection string gives us the connection string, and then we're creating a SQL : connection object, and we're opening the object. So now we have a connection to the database. Next, we're basically creating a query object so we can parse the SQL. And the reason that we want to parse the SQL is we want to use the SQL statement that was used for the list. So we want to keep all the join statements that were computed by the query builder, and we want to keep the filter expression, but we want to remove the columns and replace the columns with a sum expression to get the grand total of the order subtotal field. So the SQL query that was used for the list is e.SQL. So here you can see we're going to use the Alpha Anywhere SQL parser, and we're going to actually go ahead now and parse this SQL statement. So now if flag is true, which we didn't actually test, although we should have, but I'm pretty confident that it is going to be true. We're going to take this query object now and remove all the columns. So at this point now, after doing the reset, this query object now has none of the select columns that the original query had. And then we're going to also go and remove any limit on the query, because we don't want to limit this to the first 1 or 10 records, although actually this would not necessarily be needed here because we are going to be only returning a single record since we're doing a sum, but this is just good practice. So this resets the limit clause to be no limit, and now we're going to basically create a select item object. So we dim si as SQL : query : select item, and then we pass the new column that we'd like to add to the query. So we'd like to add this expression using this alias. So we pass this, and then once we've passed that, we can add that into the column object in our query object, and then we can actually get the resulting SQL. So q.sql statement actually goes ahead and gives us the SQL statement after we've made these modifications. So now we have a SQL statement that we can execute. We turn on portable SQL, we execute the statement, and then we read the first record in the result set, although of course there is only going to be one record in the result set, and there's also only one column in the result set, so we just simply read data.1. So then finally we're done, so we go free the result set and close the connection. So let's pause now, and then let's step through this xbasic function step by step in the next video. So we're continuing now with our description of how the server-side after query event can be used to get the total of the column displayed in the list control. So let's go now and put a debug 1 into this code, and we'll actually debug not the initial run, but we'll debug it after we've added a filter. So let's go here now and go here and select a filter. So we'll go there and select, say, Norway, and now here we are in the debugger. So we're going to step through the code now. So basically here we get our connection string. So let's just go and actually clear out all these watch expressions here. So our connection string is north winds, so we're going to go ahead there and open up the connection. Now e.SQL is the SQL statement that was executed for this list. So you can see here we're getting the first 20 rows because we've got pagination turned on. And then here's the SQL query that we defined when we were in the list builder. And you can see that at the end of the query, though, we've got our where clause that is being used to filter on the current country. So now we're going to go ahead now and pass that SQL statement and then call column.reset. So if we were to go now and look at the q.sql SQL statement property, we can see that all of the columns have now been removed from this query object. So you can see now all of the columns that were shown over here have been removed, and now we need to add in a new column. So we're going to go ahead now and we're going to pass this the new column that we'd like to add, and then we're going to call the column.add method of the query object. And now you can see that the SQL statement now has that column added in. And also you can see that because we've done q.first equals -1, the limit clause was also removed. So then we go ahead now and say SQL2. So now we have the SQL statement that's going to give us the grand total of the order subtotals. So we go ahead now and we execute the query, and then we read the result out of the result set data.1, which is going to give us the total over there. Then we go ahead and close the connection down, and then finally we compute the JavaScript that we want to send back. So that this is the JavaScript that we're going to be sending back from the server. So you can see we're setting the inner HTML of the order total element to the formatted grand total. So what we've shown in this video is how you can use the server-side after query event to generate JavaScript on the server to send back to the client. In this particular case, the use case for this method was to add a grand total to the screen, showing us the grand total of all the records in the current query for this subtotal column. Thank you very much for watching.